welcome to our next session, which is how to sell Australia to the luxury market. We'll be speaking with these expert travel agents who specialise in luxury travel, and they'll be sharing some of their top tips for attracting high-value Australia bookings and keeping those customers enthralled and inspired by what Australia has to offer. I'm joined by Mark Swords, who's Managing Director of Mark's Travel, of Swords Travel. Hello, Mark. And Esther Ward, who is a business associate with Designer Travel. Hello, Esther.
Hi.
Now, Esther, I'm going to start with you because some agents might know you from, should we say, the other side of the fence, because you had a lot of time in programming with tour operators as a product manager. So tell us a little bit just about your background and tell us what keeps you passionate about selling Australia now as an agent.
Yeah, so I've been in product in a previous life for many years, working for various different tour operators, from Qantas Holidays to Wexus, Style of Flight, so a few different companies, and creating their programs, so both in product and marketing. Also had a stint at Tourism Queensland as well, so I've been all sides of the fences over the years. But certainly, yeah, I mean, having created the programs for years and training sales staff, it's now actually really rewarding speaking to clients directly and having an influence over their trips. I often get a bit carried away though, because I get so passionate about talking about Australia, and they can often end up booking something completely different, obviously Australia, but different from what they set out to. But yeah, it's really about honing in on their interests, and then I can draw on my experiences to put together something really special. So yeah.
Yeah, we had a little bit of that in the other session with one of the great tips was, understand your client's passions, and then you can try and then match that to what Australia has, because it really has so much to offer, all kinds of different, demands and experiences. Mark, you are just back from Australia. Well, not just back, recently back from Australia. Yes. What were some of your highlights there, and some of the things that you saw there that reminded you this is a spot-on place really for luxury travelers who really want something really experiential and long-lasting memories can be made?
I went to Australia on a fam trip about 5 or 6 years ago originally, and I just fell in love with it from the first time that I went. We've tried to go back as many times as possible. The last time we went back, we went for 6 weeks, but on this trip, we wanted to make sure that we had more of a structured itinerary. So we got in touch with Luxury Lodges of Australia, and we were trying to hit up as many lodges as possible within one trip. So we literally did Perth on the west coast. We went down to Margaret River and stayed at Cape Lodge for a few nights. Then we headed right over to the east coast, and we did Queensland. We did Mount Mulligan, which is right in the outback. Then went over to Lizard Island, which was obviously the whole reef experience. And then we also did Qualia on Hamilton Island as well. So we got a full range of different products that you can do through luxury lodges. I think the good thing about Australia from an affluent traveller's point of view is that you've got everything really. You can really have that back to nature outback experience, or you can have the full reef experience where you can go diving. You've got every bit of opportunity to see and experience some amazing things, whether that's going by helicopters, yachts. There's a lot of luxury products there, and I think they do it so well. I think the hospitality, the food, everything about Australia really just appeals to me. But I think once you've been, you can make that appeal to your clients as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's true. And it really is a very hospitable place. The couple of times that I've been, everyone's just so friendly. The service is amazing in restaurants and hotels. And yeah, the depth of experiences is absolutely phenomenal. Esther, do you find people come to you saying, I want to go to Australia? Or they come to you saying, I want to go on an amazing trip. Where should I go? And how do you steer them towards Australia?
Well, certainly most people generally that I get do know they want to go to Australia, so they come to me with that in mind. But it's interesting because they often will, if it's a first time trip to Australia, they'll often label it as a trip of a lifetime. So it always feels like, yeah, there's a certain amount of pressure in making sure it's right, because they really do see it as that aspirational destination. And certainly if I've got some clients I have come to me, I might have some honeymooners come to me with not a clue of where they want to go, and I find it quite easy to steer them in the direction of Australia, because it ticks off so many different boxes that you might want from that kind of experience as well.
Mm-hmm. Mark, do you have anyone coming honeymoon inquiries for Australia? Is that a good one for them?
I wouldn't say it's one of our biggest markets. I think we generally get a lot of the family market. And when I say from a family perspective, a lot of the clients will go out and visit family they've got in Australia and then tag that onto a trip to make it a whole trip. So they'll probably go for a month at a time. I think the challenge we've got sometimes is that families with summer holidays, they don't necessarily want to go to Australia because of the time of year. So we're trying to get them to go within that 2-week period, whether it's October half term or over Easter, so they can really fit as much in as possible over the 2-week term. But I think it's a perfect place for a honeymoon. I think if you've got the time to invest and take out to Australia, it's definitely worth doing it.
You mentioned families there. For little kids, obviously, once you get there, it's absolutely amazing. There's so much to do. Is it a bit of a barrier sometimes with the flying time?
Yes, I do think it is, but I do think families now are willing to travel further. I think people are looking at places like Bali and all these other places in Asia anyway. So why not go that little bit further and go to Australia? I think we always try and push that with a stopover. So why not make a trip of it, do a few nights in Singapore or wherever first, and then move on to Australia and make a whole itinerary of it. I think if you're lucky enough to be able to travel in first and business, then it's absolutely fine, because obviously that's not an issue. And the amount of kids that you see nowadays, when you walk through first and business cabin, you see a 2-year-old sat in a seat. It's quite a regular thing. So it's definitely an option for some people.
Yeah, very true, very true. And when it comes to promoting, your knowledge that you have and your experiences and what you can do for clients, how do you go about doing that, Esther, when it comes to Australia? What's your preferred channel and what gets good traction for you?
Yeah, so generally I try to draw upon my previous experiences. So in the past, I've pulled together little iPlayer clips of previous trips and shared them on social media, or I've spoken at networking events and just given little destination insights and tips. So I try and add that personal element and draw in on actual experiences, because I think people value that expertise when it comes to Australia, and they can really relate to that.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Mark? How do you get your the word of Australia out there?
I think as a business, we've tried to move more towards tailor-made anyway. We're trying to move away from the point-to-point stuff because it can be so challenging. So we recently had a window designed for the business, which was in cooperation with a tour operator. You can see it on the screen there. So you can see Australia at the top, but we've done a bit of a round-the-world theme with the business to talk about the destinations that you can travel into. And then we've got little QR codes now on top of that, so people can click the itineraries just to actually view what a family itinerary to Australia would look like. And I think it just gives people that inspiration. I think we've got to start talking about these longer haul destinations again that people can visit and experience.
Well, that's it, wasn't it? It was off the market for a while, and long haul travel's really been picking up quite a lot. So I was going to ask you about that in a sec, but I just want to ask you about social media as well. What's your strategy with, getting some good content and things up on social media? What's most effective for Swords?
We've got 2 people in our team that really look at the social media market and say, well, actually, we don't just want to post Australia deals out there. We're not a deals company. We don't put deals out there because I don't think it really inspires somebody to go to a destination. If you put a 7-night itinerary to Australia out, unless you know about that destination, it's not really going to appeal to you. So we try and blog. So, for example, we've just been on that trip, so we'll do a full blog on luxury lodges of Australia, who it suits, what kind of accommodation you to expect when you go. But I think it's really talking from personal experience and actually saying to people, have you thought about this? And just putting them recommendations out there. But like Esther says, video is a huge part of that now as well. We need to make sure that we've got video content and stuff that's a little bit more inspiring and showing people what does a first time visit to Australia look like? Or if you've already been to Australia, what does a second or third visit look like? And all these different territories that you can visit as well.
Mm-hmm. And anyone who's watching, obviously in the virtual booths back out in the lobby, every state and every of the signature experiences has a booth there, which is full of information. And I'm sure they'll always have great videos as well, inspiring videos that people can use in their own, as well as, personal content if you've been to Australia yourself. But obviously not everyone's had the chance to get back there yet and make their own social content. So I'm sure there's lots of options out there for people. Let's talk about sales, like how things are going. We heard back in the other chat from the tour operators and the airline and tourist board that things are going very well, which is great to hear. That we've transitioned from VFR now to actual, leisure traffic. Like they're not going necessarily to see friends and family now. This is genuine holidaymakers. Not that the other people aren't genuine, but holidaymakers who are choosing Australia. And are you noticing any particular trends, like the duration of the trip, the kind of thing people are looking for? Is it any different, do you think, before the pandemic, Mark?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, we did an inquiry recently, actually. It was really interesting. And basically, the budgets, I would say people's budgets have drastically increased. But also, I think that you've got more obscure itineraries. So I got an inquiry for the Kimberley and Broome area, and it's not an area I'm familiar with at all. So I think at that point, you've then got to speak to a tour operator that you're confident is going to know that area. And I think this is where it's making sure that you're using the right operators and getting that knowledge. Because if you're not getting the information right and passing it on to the client, then obviously it can be a bit of a challenge. But I think people have definitely, they are interested in Australia. We're seeing the increase, seeing the demand out there. And I think it's just a case of now facilitating that, because a lot of the time the challenge is the airfares aren't there, or the price doesn't match what they're looking for. But I think we are seeing that people are coming in advance, which is exactly what we want. And it shows that they're not just booking that late trend anymore. We're moving away from that a little bit, and people are realizing, actually, if I want to do this big trip, then I need to book in advance now for 2024.
Yeah, that was a question we had in the other chat, actually, about the booking window, because if you do want to secure the availability, both in accommodation and in the flights, you do have to be starting to look ahead, don't you? Esther, what would you say? What are some of the things you're noticing in terms of the trends that people are coming to you asking about, or things you're booking?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, demand is definitely up, but trends can be quite tricky. I mean, every request I get is quite unique, so it makes it challenging, sort of putting it into a sort of. I've have a client that's travelled all over Australia, so she just wanted to focus on Western Australia, and she's taking the kids out for the first time, so not a usual sort of itinerary. But I mean, generally, my luxury clients kind of fall into two camps: those that will only travel premium and business, but because of the cost of flights, it's leaving a shorter, smaller pot for the rest of their ground arrangements. So it's kind of managing those expectations. And then I've got clients that are happy to travel economy, and they then want to upgrade all of their ground arrangements. So it's kind of, there has to be a compromise. I think it's quite rare where you get a client that can afford business class flights and luxury lodges throughout the whole thing. I mean, it's great if you can get those clients, but as a rule, I tend to have to be quite creative with their budget and sort of say, look, this is how we can divide it up to get the best for your money. And it's just about compromise in terms of their experiences, really. So
yeah, again, it's a demonstration of your experience, isn't it, and being able to do those things for them, and being honest in advising people what's possible and what's not. What do you think about value for money on the ground there? We all know Australia has amazing food and wine. Is that something that can be, a plus point, in that it's not going to be as expensive over here? Or what was your feeling, Mark, when you were there in terms of pricing for eating out and things like that?
Funny enough, we were just talking about this prior to the call. So we went out to the US for probably 2 or 3 weeks, and this was prior to going to Australia. And I think with the dollar and the pound being so expensive at the time, we really struggled in the US. And we were paying crazy prices for a meal. And then we went to Australia, and we were like, actually, this is quite competitive. And we've never thought that of Australia, because obviously it's always felt quite expensive compared to the UK. But I think the dollar and the pound were good at the time. And then now we're obviously in a position where it does feel a lot better priced. And I think, especially even compared to the UK, we're seeing things increase so much here. So actually, I think it's sort of lost that reputation a little bit, that it is an expensive destination to travel to, because it doesn't feel that way anymore.
Sure. And on the food and wine angle, it's very possible, isn't it, to create an itinerary that is just focused on the best food and wineries in Australia. Is that something you ever do, or do you have some ideas if people come to you for that? Mark, both of you, actually. Mark first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people obviously automatically associate Australia with gastronomy and all these different things, but I think you can create an itinerary around whatever anybody ever wants. And I think you can I use luxury lodges as quite a good example of that, because then you can start to show people exactly what that itinerary can include. But then also, obviously, Tourism Australia, Aussie Specialist, it can give you inspiration and ideas of how you can start promoting the destination better to suit people's different activities and what they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Esther?
Yeah, I mean, Australia is definitely brimming with amazing food and wine experiences. In every single state has some incredible options and vineyards, premium vineyards, and I think the quality of the food and wine is exceptional at every level. So even if you go into a little local cafe, you're getting a really good quality coffee and amazing quality food. You know, it's not like a hit and miss scenario. It's such a good quality throughout. But there's lots of really good small group tours that are focusing very much on food and wine experiences. So they're bringing in the sort of experiential products and scenic itineraries with food and wine as part of that. It's very much a part of the overall experience. So yeah, it adds a lot of value.
Excellent. Well, we have our wine tasting later in the week, and we have a session with Ultimate Wineries as well. Lovely Yalumba in the Barossa Valley, so that should be an interesting one. And if we're talking about first-time visitors, is it still, let me get this right, Reef, Rock, and what's the other one I'm missing?
Sydney.
Yeah, basically Reef, Rock, and the Bay, Sydney. Yeah. Or you know, have we moved on from that, or are they still kind of the three? What's the ultimate first time trip? Do you think, Esther?
I think people do come to you if it's their first time. They do talk of those icons, and they want to make sure that they're experiencing, most of those icons. Although it depends on the time with the reef. I mean, it depends on the time of year. So weather permitting, it may be North Queensland or it might be the Whitsundays. There's also experiences on the Ningaloo Reef on Western Australia. So there are other options that you can sort of broaden out the itineraries with. And I think also I had somebody recently, and she was quite specific with wanting, it was her first time, but she just wanted coastal experiences. She very much said, don't want to visit the outback. She wasn't interested. So I tailored a trip, covering the breadth of the East Coast, covering off all the best sort of iconic coastal experiences and sailing around the Whitsundays. And there was lots of different elements to it, but not necessarily the typical iconic trip that you would normally perhaps associate with Australia. Again, it's sort of honing in on people's interests and matching up those experiences.
Yeah. Mark, what would be your top tips if I came in the shop now, said I want to go to Australia, what's the ultimate first time itinerary for you?
I think it depends like Abby says, it depends what you're really looking for out of Australia. Are you looking for a coastal experience? Are you looking to be in cities? Are you looking to be within a foodie area? So I think our first trip, and I always say this back to everybody else, Sydney is one of my favourite cities in the world. I don't think you can go to Australia without visiting Sydney. But obviously you've got places like Melbourne, which is renowned for amazing food, and obviously you've still got all the neighbours tour and all the traditional stuff that people do when they go to Melbourne. Well, then even Perth, I think Western Australia it sometimes gets a little bit overlooked, but actually Perth's an amazing city. Beautiful beaches in Perth as well. And then obviously you go down to the south towards Margaret River. You've got great wineries. There's just so much. So I think it's really hard to say what's your first itinerary without knowing what that person really is into. And I think especially whether it's a family or a couple, whether they're into food, whether they're into activities, there's so much. I think it's really getting down, and I suppose quite an important part of getting to the nitty gritty of what clients like to make sure that we're actually offering the right itinerary from the very beginning.
Yeah, rather than just going, here you go, here's the three things I think you should see, and we'll book that. Yeah. What about accommodation? There was a talk earlier on about Southern Ocean Lodge and Longitude, and you've spoken about luxury lodges. Other lodges are available. Esther, when it comes to some of the standout stays for people who have not necessarily a little bit more budget, but just want that, really special place to stay, what are some of your top tips or things you've discovered when it comes to accommodation?
I mean, definitely sort of drawing back to the luxury lodges. If people have the budget, generally they are exceptional experiences. They're normally located right in the national parks or on the reef, that you can't often get a better location or like longitude in the closest proximity to the rock. But they're also all encompassing. So it's not just the accommodation. You're getting the experiences as part of the stay, as well as amazing food and wine experience. I was lucky enough to stay at Lizard Island on my honeymoon, and it was just phenomenal. I learnt to dive, did a sort of paddy course with a load of backpackers, and then we went to Lizard, and we literally, you could you didn't even need to dive, because you can snorkel straight from the beach right onto the reef. It's at the furthest point on the reef, and they've got sort of 20 odd private beaches that you take a little motorized dinghy out to with a picnic, and you basically mark on the map when you take the boat out that that's where you're going, and no one else is allowed to go to that beach for the day. So it's just out of this world. It really is. But really sort of barefoot luxury, it's a really unique experience. But there's so many like that. I think they are exceptional depending on the location they're in. They really do it justice for that, giving that sense of place. But of course, there are, other levels. I think Australia has lots of layers of accommodation available for all budgets. So you've got some stunning eco camps, and equally, you can stay on a luxury boat in the Whitsundays and do a liveaboard experience, and the journey can also be part of your experience. So your transport can be part of that. So whether it be on some of the rail journeys like the Garn or the Indian Pacific, or even the Great Walks of Australia, you could have walking as part of your experience. You're staying in lovely little lodges along the way, and people take your luggage from one trek to the next. So you're kind of doing it in style. So there's so many different ways you can experience luxury product. It's really quite exceptional.
I did a little bit of that in Western Australia, and we did this walk for about 4 hours, and it wasn't arduous, but it was beautiful. Got to this lovely little hotel, and they made us the best lunch, and then we had to leave. I was like, just coming back to stay. We were going back to Perth, so there was no hardship. But everything's just really thoughtfully done. They really think of everything and making it a very comfortable experience. Those great walks where they match the hotel with the experience, and the guides are amazing. So as you said, there's lots of different options. And what about cultural travel? We've got a few sessions coming up where we've got Aboriginal experiences of Australia, and we've got cultural attractions of Australia. And Indigenous tourism is getting much more popular, quite rightly so, with these businesses that are generally owned by locals, and you're led by Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders guides. Is that something that pops up with you? Do you try and weave in some cultural activities when you're building itineraries, Mark?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's quite interesting. I think the whole Aboriginal culture and also the history of Australia is quite important as well. One experience that we did this time, we went over to Mount Mulligan Lodge. So it's a helicopter flight over from Cairns. You go into the outback and you get that real outback experience. But they do talk a lot about the Aboriginal culture. And for me, it was stuff that I'd never really learned about before from Australia. So actually it was quite interesting. I thought, clients would love this. And they're actually getting to understand the history of Australia, the different cultures, but also everybody that works there, they know it inside out, and they're super passionate about it as well. They actually want to tell you this information, and they give you all the information about the past and obviously the Aboriginal culture. So I'd say it's definitely a thing. And I think most people do like to know a little bit of culture. I think it's nice to have a variation of everything when you're on a trip. But absolutely, if it's something that people are interested in, then there's so many options that we can look at for clients as well.
Cool. Now, my bad. I've just realised that people have been posting some lovely comments and questions, and it's frozen at Carol Smith at 2:43. So I've now realised that lovely Dr. Noreen has said, "Good day. I'm interested to hear from you all about how to attract high-value bookings. Haven't prescribed, because she prescribes wellness holidays to her clients, but she'd love to do more with Australia, which is nice to hear." Alice says, as a newbie to travel, she's keen to get these tips on luxury, which is also lovely to hear. And Dr. Noreen also says, what would you say is the average booking value? And are there any additional experiences or services that you upsell? Esther, let's ask you.
Yeah, I mean, from recent bookings, it's been quite a high booking value compared to sort of 3 or 4 years ago. And on average, my clients are spending about 3 weeks in Australia, and it's ranging from 18 to 25 grand for a family. So that's a family of 4, and I've had a couple traveling, and it was about 18,000. They were traveling business class and doing 3 weeks. So it can really vary. Flights, as we sort of touched on, are quite pricey now. So it's tricky to get a trip that's sort of less than 10,000 on average. Yeah.
And Mark, what would be some of the kind of additional experiences that you bolt on or add on, or are there things that you think can be easily sort of added on for customers?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you're working, I mean, we tend to include a lot of it in advance. So one of the partners that we particularly deal with, part of their service is actually, do you know what? Rather than customers having to add on additional activities, let's recommend and include that for them. So I think you want to get to the stage where you know exactly what they want to do, because people are going to do stuff when they get there anyway. So why not include it in advance for them? So a lot of the excursions or activities or going out with a guide will generally include in advance for sure. But like Esther says, I think average value bookings, it really does vary as well, because people, depending on how many are traveling, I mean, our average at the moment, I mean, the Kimberley and Broome one I was talking about earlier, it's around £40,000, and people are saying that's fine, that's not a problem. So I think people are expecting it to be that, and I think they understand a little bit more as well. But whether it's because people have saved a little bit more from COVID and they were always planning to do these trips anyway, I don't know. But I think generally for that side of the world, people are willing to pay a lot more because they know it's going to be one of them either once in a lifetime itineraries or something that they're probably not going to do again.
Yeah. And what would you advise for people who perhaps haven't had the chance to go? This is their first time, well, not first time, but they're early into thinking about Australia. The Aussie Specialist Program has a ton of training in it, doesn't it? I assume you've dabbled in that, have you? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. I've done all the modules. Yeah. No, it's really useful.
And I would say, they're regularly updating all the content in there as well. So it's never standard stuff. There's always some really interesting content in the Aussie Specialist training. And someone says, what Alice says, if someone's never been and wants a full Australia experience, how long do you think someone should go for?
I think that's quite difficult.
Yeah, it's quite difficult.
I'd probably say to do it by territory or area, because I think there's just so much to see and do. One thing I would say that we've done every time that we've been is that we've tried to make sure we visit a different area. So as much as we did Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane the first time, the next time we'll say, right, okay, well, let's go up to Queensland, let's go over to Perth, let's go down to Adelaide. And I think try and fit in a different area every single time, depending on what you're looking for. But to do it in one go, I mean, you could probably do it in 6 months, I would presume, like to do that whole lot. If you really want to experience it, I think you'd need at least a couple of months there properly, because we were there for a month and we still only need 3 or 4 destinations in a month, because obviously you want to get to see that destination itself and not just be flying in and flying out. And that is one thing I would say with Australia. It's very easy to book loads of flights, but then find yourself really busy, that you're becoming doing 1 and 2 nights in places. And for me, that doesn't really get you into the experience that you want to see. So try and spend a little bit more, do less, and then go back on a second trip to see the rest or parts of the rest next time.
Yeah, I would also concur. I spent 6 weeks in Australia once, and I think we did 5 different states and spent a lot of the time just in the car to and from the airport trying to get around. But we did include Tasmania, which no one's mentioned so far, which I would absolutely highly recommend people do spend a week down in Tassie as well. It tends to get a bit left off because it's down on its own little world down there. And then we've also had a couple of tips. Well, one of the tips, you don't have to tip in Australia, so that can help save a bit of money for people. Someone says there's such a lot to do in Western Australia as well, and loves Perth. Western Australia is obviously less flying time, as we know, because it's the closest airport for us from Europe. Guys, you don't even need us here. Look at you posting all these. Margaret River in the autumn is the best. Jeanette says, I've taken so many notes from all this, so thank you so much. And guys, I'm so sorry. We have come to the end of our session, and I could literally talk about Australia all day, as I'm sure these guys could. But yeah, there's a ton of little info and points in there. So, and yeah, she says, don't forget Rottnest Island and the Quokkas as well. That's a good point for me to say. Don't forget, obviously, our amazing TTG Aussie Fest luxury fam trip, which will be going to Western Australia, hopefully Rottnest Island and the Quokkas, and also to Sydney and lovely Silky Oaks Lodge in tropical North Queensland. If you registered for the trip when you first signed up to join Aussie Fest, that's great. We've got your details. If you didn't, I don't know why, but if you didn't, you can still register on our website, which is ttgmedia.com Aussie-Fest. But if you're here with us throughout the week, we'll be talking all about more of that. Now, as I said, that is the end of what we've got for you for today. But please do come back at 9:30 when we will be talking about Discover Aboriginal Experiences, which is one of the signature experiences that we've been talking about. And that will include details on the Sydney Bridge Climb, which is led by an Indigenous tour guide, which just gives you that amazingly different experience of seeing Sydney from up above, but also through the eyes of the people who have been there for thousands and thousands of years. Again, don't forget to explore the platform back out there, all the different content that's available in the booths. And tomorrow we will have the questions for you in each session, which you can answer. There'll be 3 per session, and that's how you're going to get your hands on the ESOP goodies. So I think I've waffled on for enough for today. Thank you so much, guys, for your time, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the morning. Take care. Have a lovely afternoon.